Sio. I am Unega Uwohali Adana Ayega, or Wian Wamblishka Wakan. I have been given the responsibility by the Cherokee people and by the Lakota people of carrying the name Sacred White Eagle Woman. When I was first given that name, I couldn't remember it. And I felt totally unworthy. And I now see that as extreme self-centeredness, and was reprimanded by a blood elder who said to me, "How dare you feel inadequate when that old man has given you that name? What an insult to him." So I shifted gears and I've tried to live it out. And it's not always easy. I want to thank the band, and thank you especially for welcoming us to your land. With my people, you don't go into another person's land without asking permission. And if they say no, you go back. And if they say yes, you come in. And I feel very honored to have been officially brought into this land at last. I had been brought into the land up in Armadale officially by the elders there, but I have never been brought into this land appropriately, so I appreciate that. I don't know, this thing's really too high. I'll get settled here in a minute. Yeah, okay. I tend to be a fairly casual person. And I've been flying for about 15 hours and I just got here this morning. And so if I just collapse in the middle of this, I hope you will find someone to carry me out and someone else will come and speak to you. Okay? I want to thank the Australian and some New Zealand Living Process Network for arranging for this. And I want to tell you a little bit about our gathering. Every 3 years, the network of people who are learning to live their life in process come together at an old Indian healing place in Montana called Boulder Hot Springs, or Peace Valley. And when we first bought that place, I had as a child or a young person, soaked there in the hot springs for my own healing. And when it came on the market, I didn't have any money, but I just bought it. And since then, we've been paying for it forever. And the old hotel was about to be bulldozed, and we decided to try to restore it and keep it. And it was named Peace Valley by the original people there because it's a place of healing. We have 40 hot springs on the land, and they range from 170 degrees down. We have to cool them to soak in them. And the original people of that land said that no one ever should not be able to come there. And so there were never any hostilities in that valley. As we say in Hawaii, I get chicken skip when I say that, because there's so few places in the world where there were never any hostilities. It's a very special place. And once every 3 years we come together and we invite different people, usually elders from all over the world, who come and share their wisdom with us, play with us, heal with each other, etc. And this year we're having an especially, I think, exciting group of people. We have people from Croatia and Africa coming. 2 men that we met at a peace conference that I spoke at in Dubrovnik last June was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. I've never been with a group of more violent people than at this peace conference. I mean, the facilitators were really violent with each other, and It was traumatizing. The marvelous part of it was that I met some very, very wonderful people. And this is man. There are two men that are coming from Africa. One of them is a Muslim religious leader, and the other one is a Christian religious leader. And when the new government came into Nigeria a few years back, the new president called them both in. They're very powerful men in the country. And he said, you two have got to work this out for the good of the country and quit what you're doing, fighting with each other. And they looked at each other, they shared this with us, and they looked at each other and said, you know, and they've done it. And now, when they're sitting in a situation like that, they're sitting with their arms around each other. They're just so close and so powerful. And just being with them is a wonderful experience. And so these are the kinds of people, and we wanted as many people from the network here to be able to come as possible to this one-week gathering that we have every 3 years. So you're helping them do that, and I thank you for being here. I want to also honor and recognize the other side of my heritage, which I feel like I also represent, and that's the English, the Reed side, and the Irish, the Longan side, and that too is part of my blood and my DNA. And so as I'm here, I'm not here, I may want to back any minute, but Joe's trying to be helpful. As I'm here, I'm representing, as everybody here is representing, a long line of ancestors that you have in your DNA, Aboriginal people. Everybody here does. And we have tried in Western culture to unlearn that, I believe. And yet, each of us carries an echo of all that has gone into us. There is nobody in this room who doesn't have ancestors. There's no one. And you have the blood and the influence and the memory of those ancestors. And we sometimes forget that. And I want to remind you that it's there and that it niggles at you. There are times I know that everybody in this room will feel uncomfortable about something that's going on around you, or will have a different take on something that everybody else is saying, this is the way it is. But your take is different. And one of the reasons that I'm here tonight is to say to you, honor that. Trust that. Because that take that you're getting may be the most important information you'll ever get. Let me give you an example. A few years back, we decided to, in our corporation, Wilson Schaef Associates Incorporated, we decided to set up a retirement plan so that I could go on causing trouble for years to come and not have to worry about it. And we, in our infinite wisdom, chose people who were totally incompetent to set it up, which is not unusual. And the U.S. government, our tax department, is very, very rigid about retirement plans because, I'm sure you know all this, but I didn't care either, really, because you're not getting taxed on the money. So basically, I don't know what your government is like, but our government, when you have money that they haven't taken taxes out of it, they see it as their money. And so that was our first confusion. We thought it was our money. Anyway, it's been languishing in this, investments and things like that. A few years ago, I decided to change actuaries, and he just looked at it and, threw up his hands in horror and said, "This is a terrible, terrible mess And we said, oh, well, we had professionals like you doing it, you know, and paid them enormous amounts of money. Anyway, so for the last 2 years, Pete, my assistant here, and I have been trying to straighten this out. And it had several problems. One was that it was overfunded, that we put more money into it than we were allowed to put into it, and our investments had grown. There is a point to this story. And one of the other problems is that it was set up wrong, completely wrong. And other than that, it was fine. Now, in the United States, when you put too much money in a retirement fund, you get fined, you get sanctioned, you get charged interest, and I think there's a fourth one. And so out of, say, $1 million, you would end up with about $200,000. I mean, that's how bad it is. And so when they told me all this, I immediately felt like I'd been kicked by a mule. And then I thought, well, let's see what happens. Well, what has happened is the bottom has fallen out of the stock market. And so we don't have as much money as we did. There is no overfunding. But we still have all the stocks. You see? So we called our money management person, our investment person, and she is in such a major depression. You cannot believe. And the minute I got her on the phone, she said, please come to lunch, we'll have lunch while, you know, trying to assuage what she thought was our immense depression. And as all of her other clients have, you know, because every one of them, I think, except me, believes that money is real. But having Aboriginal blood, I know it isn't. See, I know it isn't. And so, well, so we went in to cheer her up. And we were the only people in her entire clientele who didn't feel bad about this. See, and I said, how's it going? No, I said, I hate to have affected all the other people like this, but I'm sure the Creator dropped the stock market until we get our judgment from the IRS. As soon as we get it, you know, we'll be just fine. Now, this is living in process. That's the point. This is living in process. When I was 7 years old, I knew that I was going to be a healer. I knew that I was a healer. And I had no idea what that meant. Absolutely none. Well, I get chicken skin thinking about that, too. And I came from a really poor family. I was a hillbilly in the Ozarks. I was born in Arkansas. Bill Clinton and I are the only two that ever left. That is the only comparison I will make. I had asked Bill for a pardon for a Native American before he went out of office. The only person on his whole pardon list that was innocent. And he didn't pardon him. I'm still pissed with him. I let him know. Through his friend Beth that you're reading about in the paper. Got that rich fella pardoned, but not Peltier, who was innocent, totally innocent. Anyway, I spent several years as a child trying to figure out what that meant. I didn't talk to anybody about it, which I think is very interesting. I just held it inside me, knowing I was a healer, I was going to be a healer, this was my work. And finally, I discovered the word psychiatrist. I thought, okay, I'll be a psychiatrist. And so I studied everything I needed to line myself up to do that. Until I got to a point where I decided I couldn't stand doctors. And I thought, this is a problem. And luckily, living in process, when I had to fill out those medical school applications, when I was really reaching the deadline, I was called in by the dean and invited to be nominated for honor fellowship for young women to be sent to another campus, which was at least 1,000 miles from their home and where they went to school. And it was sponsored by the Danforth Foundation. You know Ralston Purina? Do you know Ralston Purina over here? Mr. Danforth. This was his favorite fellowship of his foundation. And it was given to young women to develop as a person and to be of service to a campus. And it gave me that breath to see what I was going to do next. This is living in process. This is living in process. And so I was sent to Maryland and spent a year there. And during that time, I came to know I couldn't go to medical school. I just couldn't do it. There was something wrong for me. And I had a fellowship in psychology and social work. And just a week before school, I decided I couldn't stand social workers either. And I didn't know much about psychology, so if I had known better, I would have probably not done that either. But I went over to the psychology department and I said, well, I haven't really heard from you clearly. And they said, well, everybody's been out. So they accepted me on the spot. And I said, well, I need money. I don't have any money. And so the next day, they said, well, we'll see what we can do. And the next day they called and they said, you have full scholarship. So I called the Danforth Foundation. I said, my tuition's paid. What are you going to give me to go on to graduate school? And they said, oh, we'll pay for everything else. So I said, okay, this must be right. So I did that. And I did all my doctor work, was an honor student. And when it came to writing my dissertation, couldn't do it. I just couldn't take that last step. And so I quit. And I said, there's something wrong here, but I don't know what it is. But I know there's something wrong. And so I decided to work for a while. And it's so interesting that I look back. I gave myself 3, what I would say, system excuses for leaving. One is I made more money than anyone in the department. 2 is I was better known than anybody in the department. And 3, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, and so I said, okay, it's okay for me to quit. And so I went and worked for several years as a psychotherapist. And when I knew it didn't matter anymore, I finished my doctorate. So I brought that credential of a PhD in clinical psychology with me and worked for many years as a psychotherapist. And I studied, like everybody else my age, I studied with Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir and Carl Rogers and, all of them. I worked with all of them. And I began to think years later that psychologists and psychotherapists are people in search of something to validate, someone or something to validate what they do. That we're always looking for the technique that's going to make it all make sense. We learn technique after technique after technique after technique. And for me, there was still something missing in healing. What I could see was that people who worked with me got better, but they never healed. And that wasn't enough for me. And so I kept searching. And I felt like I was part of this army of searchers. I used to say about my former husband, who was a PhD in clinical psych and head of the department, that he was a searcher, a seeker. He never found anything. And then he was like always standing on a pile of diamonds and never looked under his foot. And I believe that's true of me too. And so what I did was I started, thanks to the feminist movement, I started to look inside myself at what seemed right to me. Because when I started working with groups of women, I had never in my life seen so much pain and anger. And I had not a clue what to do with it. And so what I did was I stepped aside, stayed out of the way, and just let it come. And I began to see people getting better as they did their own work. And of course, what happened was I got in touch with my own pain and rage. And I was a real monster for several years. I'm certainly not now, but I was for a while. And again, I continued to try to find what fit for me to work with, how to work, what to do. And I was at that point unaware of my Cherokee roots. I was born of a generation of indigenous people in the United States who hid their identity in order to survive. I spent several years after I found out that I was half Cherokee being very angry with my parents. And recently I was a speaker at an Indigenous Women's Wellness Conference. And I listened to the women my age. I'll be 67 in 2 days, celebrating here in Australia. Women my age had all been carried off to boarding schools and lost all their heritage and lost all of their pride in being who they were. And what my family did was they raised me as a Cherokee and never told me it was Cherokee. They taught me that it was reality. So I had the heritage, but not the label, which was very confusing for a while. And so as I began and kept trusting my own process and trusting my own intuition and trusting my own awareness, I went deeper and deeper into this work that I now call the living in process work. And for me, it is the most healing work I have ever done. It fits for me. I see people heal from things that I was taught in graduate school nobody ever heals from. And this is really important to me. At times it's been very lonely. At times it's been very frightening. I say those people that peace conference are mean. Psychotherapists are mean when you challenge them. I haven't met a meaner bunch of people, frankly, than challenging the religious belief system of psychotherapists, which is, I think, the scientific method, the religious belief system. And I began to separate out the scientific method and what I learned in my pre-med studies and what is healing, because those two are intermeshed in our minds. Psychotherapy is so integrated into Western culture that it's very difficult to separate the two. And what I have come to know is that the solution is never found within the problem. Take that one away with you tonight. The solution is never found within the problem. And psychotherapy is so integrated with the problem that I believe, and this is my belief, you don't have to agree with me. You don't even have to like me. You don't even have to like me because I'm saying this. That's your problem, not mine. But psychotherapy basically helps people adjust to a sick system and learn to live within it. But it does not help people to heal and find their own way and their own path to their spirituality and their life work and their life being. It's a cloning system, if you will, from my perspective. And I was a very good psychotherapist. I was just talking to Pete's brother the other day, and he was upset with me because he was in psychotherapy for 8 years. Imagine what that cost. and believed it helped him, and I'm sure it did. But the issue for me is that it adjusts us to dysfunction. And this is where I'm grateful for my DNA from another system. We in Western culture have created a system that is human-centered and opposed to living. You with me on that one? That's the other thing to take away. Human-centered and opposed to life. It is not a holistic system. Now, I've come to believe that each of us, each of you here, is a process. You are not a thing. You are not an entity. You are not static. You are a living process. Your life is a process. It is ever moving, ever changing. In Western culture, what we have tried to do is to static ourselves and the universe so that we feel secure. We have lost the ability to live in process. We have even lost the awareness. When I was working on the book Living in Process, I just assumed everybody knew what that meant. And then I talked to people and had no idea what that meant. And I said, well, to my editor, I said, well, when I say to someone, you are a process, they must know what that means. And she said, they don't. They don't. And so I started going around asking people, when I say to you, you are a process, do you know what that means? I thought, my word, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. Because we think of the energy we put into it. Here's the example I often use. Those of you especially who, wait a minute, you know how you want to get your house fixed up just the way you want it? And then you think you can quit and you can go on and do the other things you want. The slip covers wear out and the paint chips and the furniture falls apart. And you feel attacked by your own house. How dare you be a process when I want you to be static? Or you're in a relationship and you think, I'm going to get this relationship tidied up and then I can go on with my life. And it never gets tidied up. You know, it's a friggin' process. It just goes on and on and on and on. And what has happened with our mentality like this is that we have lost the skills for being a process, for living in process, for living a process, for respecting other people's process as process. And we've tried to static everything, including ourselves. We assume we're going to get healed and then that's it, and we can go on with other things. And we have people in the training groups who get so upset when they've done their recovery work from addiction and they've done their process work, and then something else comes up. And it's like, you didn't tell me about this. I mean, here you think you're doing pretty well, and an incest memory, for heaven's sake, comes up after 5 years of feeling clear. Well, this isn't fair. No, that's not the way it works. In this work, everything that comes up is an opportunity. So you're having a rough time dealing with something? Wonderful. Wonderful. This is an opportunity. It is a door that is opening that is saying to you, you have a chance to be more whole, more free, more functional, more happy. Some people run from that. But the door is there for that. Now, I've come to believe that as we have created this society which is not supportive of life and our living, and I'm not just talking about our life, I'm talking about life on this planet. I'm talking about animals, nature, the whole schmear of life. As we've created this system, I believe we have also, in our DNA, being in the process of creating ways to deal with this. Now, some of you know that I spend a great deal of time talking about addiction. And I talk about addiction in the broadest sense of the word. I talk about addiction, that any process you involve yourself in, which negates living, which shuts off your awareness of yourself and your own knowing and your own growth, and tries to make you stop. Okay? That's what I mean by addiction. And what any addiction does, whether it's alcohol or work addiction, or sex addiction, or drugs, it doesn't matter. It all has the same process. And that process is cutting you off right here and having this thinking, which goes absolutely berserk. You know, it's very often very logical and rational and doesn't make any sense at all with the mind of an addict. And having this body that is sending you all of this information that you don't let get through. I mean, that's what addiction does. And of course, I have likened Western culture to an active alcoholic in my book, When Society Becomes an Addict. Because the characteristics that we see, for example, in our governments, and I don't know that much about your government, but I can make an assumption it's not all that different from ours, which is absolutely insane. I think it's good to look at our government as an active addict. And then we feel more comfortable with what we're dealing with, because that's the way it is. And the characteristics are dishonesty, the illusion of control, very big one, perfectionism, self-centeredness, defining the world in terms of ourselves and our own universe, etc. These are the characteristics of addiction. These are the characteristics that we see in Western culture. So that we have created a culture, which is a very short-lived culture, by the way. It's only, about 300 or 400 years old, as I understand, this culture. And this is why our Aboriginal friends here have a closer memory that there was another way to do things. Because part of the addicted mind begins to believe our abstractions, our confusions, our thinking. They talk about addiction being a disease of perception. And part of what I see is beginning to believe that our perceptions are real when our perceptions are confused. And I think one of the reasons that we need to listen to our Aboriginal selves is because we have a memory that predates that disease of perception. You with me? And that is in every one of us. I know the feedback often that I get from my books is, you have said what I've always known, but I never could put it in words. I get that feedback a lot. I take it as a great honor. And I know that we all have this voice in us that says that something isn't right, that we need to do something else. And embedded in all of this, for me, is our spirituality. I'm not talking about religion here. I'm talking about the knowledge that every one of us, is a spiritual being. That is our baseline. And that we are not human beings trying to learn how to be spiritual. We are spiritual beings trying to cope with being human. And that as we operate out of our spirituality, which I equate with our process, that as we operate out of that, we develop a level of serenity and peace. no matter if the stock market falls. We have that we live with, because it relates to the very core of our being, or as Paul Tillich used to call it, the ground of our being. The process of our being is one of spirituality. And we may be very religious and not spiritual, if you know what I mean. And our spirituality predates everything we have learned. It goes before that, and it comes into that. Now, one of the things that we learn in the living process work is we learn to trust our life process, just like the example I gave you. You know, I may have money when I retire. I may not have money when I retire. I may write more books when I retire. I may not need money when I retire. We may have blown up the planet already and money's useless. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I just need to participate in my life. Addicts don't participate. Part of addiction is withdrawal into your own world and not participate. I've come to believe that spirituality is participation. As long as you participate, you are living your spirituality. And that means participate by feeling your feelings, knowing your intuition, etc. So that's a big part of living process work. It's kind of like cleaning out the dead wood of addiction, of how we've learned, how our minds have learned to think addictively, how we've learned to behave addictively, the hold that the addictive process has on it, to clean that out so that we're available to ourselves. Now, what we find often, and I think they find this in 12-step programs, is that people, as they let go of their addictions, all those things that the addictions were masking start to come up. And often, I think, in the 12-step program, there is no place to deal with it. Now, we call that our deep process work. And this is something that I have come to know less about over the last 20-some years that I've been working with people's deep process and my own. I thought I really knew what it was at first. And the more I'm with it, the bigger it is and the less I feel I know. But our deep process work is, I think of it, remember the opening scene in Macbeth where the witches are around the cauldron? Bubble, bubble, toil, and trouble. Remember that? Oh, good old Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. Well, I think of our deep process that way. It's like it's in there, bubbling and boiling around, and every once in a while it goes boop, 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 and we can ignore it, and then it goes boop, boop. And I think of like depression. Sometimes you just get massively depressed. I think that is wonderful because it's boop, boop, boop. Something is coming up that's really, really important. It's important for your healing. It's important for your growth. It's important for your awareness. It's important for your living, for your being alive, for your being free. It's a gift. And if you ignore it, it'll come up again. A little harder next time, probably. But so in terms of dealing with anxiety attacks, depression, memories, all these things, by medicating them, I encourage people to deal with them by walking into them and having a safe place where you can stretch out and let it come. And often it's feelings in some way that are the door, but it's nothing about emotive feelings. It's like that's your door. Now the door into your deep process almost never is what the deep process is about. I think it's a way that our inner being tricks our logical and rational mind. So that you have to go into your deep process, and as you go into it, the process will tell you what it's about. And you may not even know when you come out of it what it was about, but you'll know. You'll find out. And it's because our inner being is not logical and rational. Our inner being is whole. It may not seem to make any sense, and it may make the most sense of anything you've ever faced into. Deep processes are like a gift we carry with us all the time, that are there for our attention. And what we often do is people just go stretch out on a mat and see what comes. And for example, I mean, it's every day our deep process is. For example, you get a letter and you suddenly feel really uncomfortable. You just go stretch out and see what that's about. And your thinking mind is not going to get you there. It never will get you there. You may come up with something that's very logical and rational, but it probably has nothing to do with what your deep process is really about, because your deep process is on another plane. It's on another level of consciousness that has nothing to do with the conscious mind. And that plane is where healing takes place. Now, as we have our Aboriginal friends here from this land, and when I'm with my people, what I know is they live their process all the time. Living in process was the way life was done, if you listen to the stories. And we have moved into trying to control that process. One of the biggest enemies to our wholeness is our illusion of control, of our trying to decide what our life is going to be and then making it turn out that way, of our trying to decide who we are and then girdling ourselves into that image. There are many times in my life where I've had to discover that I'm not who I thought I was, or I'm not going the direction I thought I wanted to go, or I thought I needed to go. And every time I've trusted that, it's turned out better than if I were in control. Every time. I'm in one of those places right now in my life where I'm not sure where I need to be going next. And all I need to do is trust my process, do my work, and it will tell me where I need to go. But if I try to figure it out through the left brain and control it, I will be miserable. And I know that. Now, I've done my process work enough to know that I can trust it. And sometimes I still am resistant to doing it because it's the unknown. It's the unknown. Now, deep processes can take all kinds of forms. Sometimes you can go into a rage, or sometimes you go into deep fear, or sometimes you go into just crying and you don't know what it's about, and you'll cry and cry and cry and cry for days. That's okay. That's okay. I sometimes think of our deep process as our ability to tap into what Jung called the collective unconscious. And we can pull out of that oneness anything that we need to help us deal with our life and whatever. It's like our deep process facilitates our becoming the oneness. Does that make any sense to you? I don't have the language all the time for this. But let me give you an example. A lot of people, when they do their due process work, they will start having sexual abuse memories or death memories. Death. And I used to call it past life stuff. And I'm not even sure that's what it is anymore. I just think it is, and then their families will say, well, there's no incest in our family. Of course, every family always says that. But the thing that it is it doesn't matter. You see, it doesn't matter because at some level, you're moving into a level of consciousness where you're tapping into whatever it is you need, whatever it is you need for your next step. And if it's an incest, whatever, well then you just stay with it and see where it takes you. And what happens is when your thinking mind comes in, it tries to stop the process. And it will take you out of the process. But if you just stay with the process, it will take you wherever you need to know. Now, I have known therapists, for example, who have said to clients when they've had incest memories, you have to confront the perpetrator and you'll never be well until you do this and you have to do this and blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. When you start focusing on someone else, you're in trouble. Stay with yourself. What we find in this work, for example, is that people who actually have been incested, as they do their process, almost always they come to a place of compassion for the perpetrator. And they recognize that the perpetrator has to deal with their own stuff. That's not their issue, and they're not going to get them off the hook by confronting them. Or they may want to confront them, but not because it's the therapist's idea. You see, it's because whatever it is in their own process that they need to do, and a respect for that process. So this work is about your learning that you heal yourself in connection with your Creator, your higher power, your God, whoever that is for you. A couple of years ago, I was on a speaking tour with Amar Tohunga in Germany and Austria. And it was a really hard experience for me in some ways, and it was very good for me because there were so many ways that we differed. And I wanted to be really gracious and also speak my truth. And it was hard sometimes. And my biggest learning, which was very, very important to me, was that as the granddaughter of a Cherokee medicine woman and the daughter of a Cherokee shaman, I know how to do healing. I know how to zap you. And I won't do it. I won't do it. Because that's not my work here. This is not appropriate. I believe at this time in history, getting healings from someone else is not appropriate. I have said, and gotten in a lot of trouble for this one, that I believe that if Jesus came to the planet right now, he wouldn't heal a soul. He would say, it's time that you human beings learn to tap into and connect with your own power, your own awareness, and your own direct connection with the Creator of all things, and that is where your healing comes from. And on that tour, I discovered that the hardest thing I do in this work is sit and keep my mouth shut. Because I can sometimes see where you need to go. And there are times where I just go. And sometimes but I won't do it for you. I will not do it for you. And my training in psychotherapy was to do it for you and to be responsible for you, professionally, legally, morally. But that's no longer appropriate for where we are as a human species, I think. Now, one of the problems of being an eagle woman is we fly pretty high. And we see a really, really broad picture. And a lot of people just want to stay right with their navel. And me, and I. Well, this work won't let you stay there. And I think you've seen from just the way the people who are here, who are in this work with me in Australia, the way they operate, it's a community. And I have come to believe that you cannot heal, we cannot heal in a solitary fashion. That we need a community for healing. We need a community where we know that we won't be allowed to get away with our crap, where we know that we'll be loved through it, where we know that we have responsibility with and for each other. We've lost, in Western culture, we've lost the real meaning of community. In Samoan medicine, for example, wonderful book on that, when a person goes to a Samoan healer, the first thing they do is they say, what's going on in your community? There is not this concept of individual illness. There is a concept of community not functioning as it should and as it can. We become more and more isolated. So that in the living in process work, we live together for a week, 2 weeks, up in the Blue Mountains. And we stay connected with each other with newsletters, and people sponsor each other, all kinds of things. But there's learning how to be there for each other. That is part of learning to live in process. And then with the International Gathering, you're with people from all over the world who are doing this work, but with other people too, who are bringing their knowledge and information into this work, like the two fellows from Africa who are going to be there. We have a couple from Croatia coming. So that whole community part of it, I think, is part of the healing. And one of the things that I had to give up when I left my psychotherapy practice in 1984 is I gave up working with individuals. Because I do believe it gives a therapist too much power. But working in community spreads that power among us all. You see what I mean? So there are all these aspects to living in process. And what I've come to know is that it is very, very ancient. It is very ancient. And it's what we need in modern times. And we can look to our Aboriginal people who haven't left it so much. And it is also there in every one of us, these ancient knowings and longings. And I remember there are a couple of Indian stories that I'd like to share with you. One is the one that's told that long, long ago, we were one with all creation. We were one with the Creator. We were one with each other. We were one with nature. Every culture has these stories. As we go back, the Irish have it, the English have it, the Gauls, the Celts. We were one. We operated as one. The people of this land have left this the most recently. Those who have left it, of any group in the world, I believe. But we all knew this. We all operated this way. And the Indian story is that there came a time when the elders saw that we were straying. And they said, you know, these people are becoming confused. And they're leaving what they know, and they're leaving the old ways, and they're doing things that are destructive. And we believe that our responsibility as elders is to protect the wisdom. And so we are so concerned about where our people are and where they're going, that we feel as elders that we have to hide this wisdom. And when they're ready to return to it, it will be there and it will be safe. So we need to find a place where it's safe to put it. So they thought and they thought, you know how elders do, I don't know if some of you have much experience with it, but elders can sit for a long time and say nothing. And they did this, and they said, and they said, and then finally one said, I think I know what we can do. And they were all, oh good, what? And so I said, but there's a cave. I know a cave and nobody knows about it. And we could take all the wisdom and bundle it up. We could dig a hole in the back of that cave and we could bury it and it'd be safe there. And they said, oh, good. And then immediately someone started feeling uncomfortable, so they sat. And then they said, that's not going to work. They're very curious, these people. They're very snoopy. Someday they're going to find this cave, they're going to go digging around, they're going to dig it up, and they're not going to be ready for it. And they all shook their heads. Bad idea. So they sat longer. And then another one said, I know what we could do. There's a lake. It is so deep they don't even know where the bottom is. We could bundle it up, wrap it up, and we'll drop it down that lake, and it'll be okay. So I said, okay. A few days later, I don't know, you know, they'll hook it, they'll learn to dive, they'll find it, and they won't be ready for it. So again, the plan didn't work. They sat. And finally, the oldest elder of them all came forward, and she said, I know where we can put it. I know where we can hide it, and it's a place they'll never go. And they were all thrilled to death, and they said, what is that? And she said, put it inside of each one of them. They'll never look there. And that's what this work is about. This work is about that it's time for us to go back to that oneness, back to that original living with ourselves, each other, and the Creator. And the knowledge and understanding on how to do that is inside each one of us. And this work is helping us to return to what we already know. And we either try to forget or have forgotten. See, I can talk for days on this. I think I'll stop. Some of you look like you're tired than I am. And Joey asked me if I wanted to take any questions, and I'm fine with it. I think it's probably morning in the United States now. So does anyone have any comment or question? Is there anything I haven't addressed that you would like to know anything about? Or is this making sense to you at all? I love this work. I absolutely love this work. I believe in it. The more I do it, the more I believe in it. Sometimes I'm just awed by what comes out of a deep process, by what a deep process is, and what people come up with in their deep processes. There's some people in the training, especially in Germany, it's interesting, that will be totally out of touch with their own spirituality, and then they'll stretch out on mats, and they come back and they're like glowing, and they revamp it. They have no content at all to what they've just done, except they're back in sync with their own spiritual self. It's just amazing, and they're glowing. You know, nobody else has done anything. It's just
There is something really, really about this deep process, and I feel like I just have the tip of the iceberg awareness of it. And so many people are so afraid of it because it seems like, God forbid, being out of control. Which of course it is. That's the point. I mean, when you're in control, look at what a good job you've done. So, yes?
The deep process work, is that really our own experience of the divine?
I think that's part of it. I don't know what it is. You know, I have to say, you know, like, I want to be very clear about this. There are techniques like holotropic breath work, say, that I think attempt to access your deep process work. But I've come to believe that when we try to get through it with any technique, whether it's yoga or deep breathing, or that we are trying to control it and trying to force it. And to me, I've connected being a woman, having birthed 2 children. I equate it to the difference between naturally birthing a child and using forceps to pull the child out. And often the child is damaged, and the mother too, in that process. And so I really encourage people not to use techniques. You may get to your deep process, and I believe it will be distorted and maybe damaged in the process. And if you just learn, and that's what living in process is, learn to trust your deep process and let it guide you, not you control it. And for me, I think it is accessing, it's like accessing the oneness or the wholeness or the hologram, or, and it's really important not to force it. Really important not to force it. Yes?
The deep process work, you say not to do it with a one-on-one therapist, but is it safe to do it on your own, or would you need to do it in community?
I would absolutely not do it on a one-on-one with an individual therapist. That's just my belief. I think you can do your deep process work on your own, and I think all of us, or probably most of us, have had deep processes in our life when no one was there. And it probably scared the bejesus out of us, you know. And what we probably did was we tried to get control as soon as possible, and we probably aborted our deep process. And so my experience has been over the years to develop doing it in community. Because sometimes if you really turn your illusion of control over to your deep process, you may become quite active. You may be rolling around or kicking around or yelling and screaming. And it's really helpful to have people with you who will protect you without controlling you. And my experience as a therapist and as a client is that there is a lot of energy into controlling your deep process. I remember when a family member went through treatment for alcoholism, and I was so relieved that he was in treatment, and you know, word was out that the Wilson Schaef family was there for Family Week, and it was going to be really tough. And so I'm in the first session, I started crying just out of utter relief. And the therapist got absolutely terrified, and he kept saying, "What are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you feeling?" I said, I'm doing it. And he kept saying, "Don't tell me what you're feeling." I said, "I'm doing feeling." And went downhill from there. And my experience is that so many places, you know, like I quit doing work even back when I was a therapist. I quit doing it in an office building because my clients were restricted with what they, so I started working out of my home. And I can remember one story. When I was working with this couple, and he was a police lieutenant, and she was a school teacher, and they had quite a, I would say, tense relationship. And but she had a deep process come up, and she didn't feel safe with him in the room, so she asked him if he would sit out. And my waiting room was my living room. And so my 14-year-old son was watching television, and Eric came out to sit with him, and I'm in with his wife, and she's going, you know, and all kinds of noise and stuff. Eric turned to Roddy and said, "Doesn't that bother you?" And Roddy said, "What?" And he said, "Well, all that," you know, they were very enmeshed. And he said, "All that yelling and screaming that she's doing." And Roddy said, "Oh, no, that's the sound of healing." And what we've seen, I have to say, we have one of our members of our training group who was started out in the womb, and he's now, what, 6? 5 or 6, Jack? 6? And he just does his deep process. You know, and one day, when he was about, I think, 3, he always likes to get into lunch first after we say the pulley. And so he ran in, and he came shooting out of the dining room and just absolutely catapulted onto the mat. And, you know, and just, and everybody kind of stood there, and Jack does his deep process work. And when he finished, he said, "What's the matter, Jack?" He said, "There's nothing I like for lunch." So we said, "Well, can we fix you something else?" And he said, "Okay." That was it. But he just does it. And we have kids who come to the training with their parents, and they'll say to their parents, "Don't dump this on me. I think you need to go to the mat." Or we had another, one time, a woman was dealing with some really heavy, almost violent incest memories. This is in Indiana. And we had a 2.5-year-old from Germany there. And he'd be around playing around the room and doing his thing. And she would go to the mat, and every single time, no matter where he was, he'd stop, and he'd go running over, and he'd sit with her. And he would pull out Kleenex and put it there. And we just, you know, so the kids come to the training groups, too, if their parents want to bring them. And we're now seeing this generation of children that have started out doing the living process work in the womb. And they're so clear. You know, they're just so clear, and they add a lot to their families and their communities. So it's so much more than any one definition that we could give it, you know, the deep process. Yes?
I've got a question about being in the world, having corporate jobs, being out there, needing to do things, achieve things. Part of what I do is kind of set the goals and then work with my feelings around that. How does that fit with you? How does that fit with what you're saying? Is it that you allow the process to set the goals, or is it you allow life to happen, or not quite sure?
Well, what I would say, you know, it sounds to me like what you're saying fits very well in a corporation, but not in life, which is one of the problems, that we have set up institutions, that organizations that are designed on an industrial model, and it fits well for industry, but it doesn't do really well for life. And it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, the corporate world or a nonprofit organization or church, you know, just the way we organize. And so what you're talking about is control, and it will kill you. It will kill you. The illusion of control is one of the most deadly things that we live with. And also dualistic thinking will kill you. So you say, either I do this or I do that, you know, and that's getting caught in dualism. And so my response to you would be that, well, I guess when I heard your question, let me back up. What I heard in your question was a way of scaring yourself that we do this all the time, that we say, well, if I live in process, how will I live in my job? You know, and so what that does is that stops you. And learning to live in process is learning to live a life of faith. And learning to trust that if you continue to take one step at a time along the path that is clear for you, that at the point where you need to make a change, you'll be ready to make it. You see? And so you're setting goals and trying to reach them is a way of trying to control your life to go in a way where you feel safe. And life isn't safe. You know, living life is not safe. But participating in your life is safe. It's like the money thing, you know, that no matter what happens, you're going to be ready to deal with it. And let me just give you a quick example. When I was in high school, there was this guy that I loved, who loved me, and we never went out with each other. He would date one of my best friends so he could be around me, and I would go out with fellas who had more energy because they could keep up with me. And but we were always kind of in each other's lives. And then for years after that, we kind of held on to this illusion of loving each other, you know, so that it really was a nice barrier from getting really involved with anybody else for both of us for years and years and years and years. And at one point I got this, that we were, he was married, I was married, but we were still, well, we had this little fantasy about out there with somebody who really loves me. And so finally I got it, that I had to let this go. You know, that was my good old brain. And I went, because I couldn't even imagine letting it go, you know. And then my sane process voice came into me and said, well, you're not ready to let it go right now, so quit worrying about it, you know. So I said, okay, don't have to let it go today. And then I went to the class reunion, and I did my control thing. And I had breakfast with him in my room at the motel, and I stood, and this guy's a forest ranger, you know, and I always loved his arms. They were just so great. He had great legs, fantastic legs, and butt. I'm a butt person. Great legs. So I stand in front of the door, and I was several pounds less than I am now, and I folded my arms, and I said, you're not getting out of this room until you let go of me. Because I'd already said to him, we have to do this. And he said, well, you can go ahead and let go of me if you want to, but I don't want to. So I said, you have to do this. And he just stood there and looked at me and kind of laughed, you know. Well, the phone rang. And it was my old boyfriend, my first boyfriend from high school. And he said, hey, how are you? How's my first love? And I said, still your first love, I guess. And he said, yeah. And he said, my mom has cancer, and she'd like for all the old gang to come over and be with her this afternoon, and like we used to hang out. And, are you willing to do that? I said, sure. I turned to my friend and said, are you willing? He said, yeah. So we all go over there. And here's this other guy. He said, I want you to meet my wife, and I want you to know my kids. I want them to know my first love, you know. And he's just such a neat person. And then I look over at my love that I've been holding on. He's drinking beer and peeing, and drinking beer and peeing, and drinking beer and peeing. And I thought, whoa. And it was
That's great.
the day before, yesterday, someday, like, you know, before I left, the day before, I called him because I've been thinking a lot about him and wondering if he's all right. And I called him and had a long chat with his wife, who never would speak to me before when I was holding on to her. Long chat with her, long chat with him, invited him to the gathering. No buzz, no strings, except love. Old, loving, healthy love. If I had tried to force that, I would have kept it going. But when I let the process take care of it, the wholeness came through. When I work with corporations, I try to teach them this. It is very difficult. Very difficult. Okay? Do you see what I'm talking about?
In regards to creating, I suppose. Like, that's the way I create my life.
That's the way I create my life. Like, choose where I want to go and then feel the feelings as it comes along. Now, sometimes that will head me off this direction, sometimes that will head me off that direction. So I suppose it's the question is, how do you create that? How did you create the book? Did it just happen one day at a time, or did you decide to write a book and then allowed yourself the process to get there?
Well, I don't confuse myself as a creator. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be. When you say you create your life, bullshit. You know, if we believe that we do that, we forget to participate because we're so busy running the show. And what I've learned is that the creator is much more creative than I am. And if I had been able to run the show the way I thought I wanted to run the show, my life wouldn't have been anywhere near as good as it has been. And so I have to let that in. And my job is to participate. My job is to participate. I did not write those books. I had not planned. In fact, I can remember one session with God, driving 36 miles, screaming all the way, I can't do this. Don't ask me to do this. My God, I can cook. I can make clothes for my kids. I'm even a good psychotherapist, but don't ask me to write a friggin' book, you know. And I wrote the book in 10 days. Think I did that? If you had asked me would I have written 12 books in my life, I would have laughed so hard I would have wet my pants. Believe me. Ask Pete. He helps me birth them. He types them. And every time it's like, wow, Pete, can you believe this? Or I'll read something like Native Wisdom for White Mind, and I'll say, oh, this is good. Where did that come from? And so much of what I do comes from somewhere else. One of my mentors, the one who gave me the Lakota name, Wiamwamblishkawakhan, he said, I am a hollow bone. I am my best when I am a hollow bone. When I let the Creator come through me and I don't get in the way. And we can be so much more than we as creators can invent if we allow that process to happen. Plus, you're going to get tired. You're young, but you'll get tired creating your own life after a while. And it's going to be so much better. There's just so much more wisdom that can come through you if you're available to let it come through you. You got that? Yeah, okay. I think we probably should go. Do you want to say anything? There's a gale up here coming out. Are you cold out there? Yeah, sorry about that.
When you ask for guidance on a particular subject from the universe or whatever,
Yeah.
is that a form of control? You ask for guidance on a particular subject?
I usually just ask for guidance, period. And, given any opportunity to try to control anything, I will do it. But I quickly catch that I'm doing it now faster than I used to, And so, and I never ask for it in any direction or, like, please make this happen. It's pretty much a four-letter word for me, HELP. And then let it go. And I've had trouble learning that. I mean, I'm an Aries for that. You know, I will butt my head against any wall. Just show me a wall, and I back up and run at it. You know. So I mean, I have to deal with that. Patience is not an inborn virtue. It's something my bloody head has taught me. You know. So yeah, but I learned. I do learn. I'm still capable of learning, and so the more what I know, I have a great life, you know, and most of that's when I'm hollow, you know. So it's better than anything I could have invented. So I do have tremendous faith and tremendous trust. And when something comes up, I have a bodyguard tonight here because I have a stalker that has chosen me. And, you know, I was like, hey, I don't need this stalker, you know. And then it's like, well, okay, what do I have to learn from this? You know, what's my part in this, and what do I have to learn, and what I need to look at, and Creator must have something in mind, you know. Do I need to stay on the other part of the planet for a while, or not come down to, you know, down under? What? He's not here in this country. It's another country, but he's close by. And what do I need to learn? You know, and that's my attitude now. You know, I may at first say, but very quickly I say, okay, what's this about for me? And then this whole living in process is a constant learning. But in the process, I'm evolving and growing, and my spirituality is becoming. I'm returning to it. I guess that'd be better. I'm returning to it. Yeah. And these people who welcome us here tonight, they never left it. Yeah, they never left it. And this is what we have to learn. Yeah. And I can find it, like, you know, when I'm with the western part of my family, they left it. And when I'm with the Cherokee part of my family, they may have learned the Western ways, but they haven't left the old participation in life way. So we need that. We need that. Yeah. I think we've had enough, don't you? Thank you very much for coming.